Joining us now for analysis on the return of football is Kate Delaney, a syndicated sports columnist and radio host. So Kate, you and I have been talking about the return of football for I think about a year now. Ever since the last season ended and coronavirus was here, there was a lot of uncertainty about it. So I want to ask you about this whole narrative that's taking place about the inclusion of politics and sports. Is it anything new, or is it just something right now that the media is focusing on?
I think it's something the media is focusing on because, as we know, in the past, they're always intertwined. Think of protests. Think of Olympics that have gone down. Think in '72, the Israeli athletes that were kidnapped and killed, and that was the Palestinians. And so political statements, and which they're severe, obviously, but boycotting, etc., has always been around. But we had kind of a lull where we hadn't seen it in a while. I think it had been probably a decade where it wasn't hard hitting. Now it's back full force with all kinds of issues.
No, and you bring up the Olympics, and I think that's a perfect example. I mean, you brought up one of the harsh realities of politics taking place in sports where it quite literally costs lives. But then I also think back to Jesse Owens, things of that nature, where there are times to be celebrated as well when we talk about politics in sports. I think the time where it's divisive is that's a conversation that we're just going to have given the times. But there have been times, for example, where it's been almost 100% celebrated. I mean, we played the clip of George Bush after 9/11. I'm a Cubs fan. I remember Sammy Sosa running out with the American flag. There are times where it has been very much so celebrated. But from a media perspective, does that make your job more interesting or more difficult?
I think it makes it more interesting. I don't know that everybody would agree with me. In fact, I'd say a lot of my colleagues would say it makes it more difficult. But I think that as human beings, we have different layers. And if this is what's happening in our world, then it's going to be reflected in our sports.
And when it comes to football as well, I think a lot of people are using the politics of the return of football to kind of say that's the reason why ratings are down right now. But when you look across the board at most major events, ratings do seem to be down. And I think that's largely because a lot of people are turning to online platforms, streaming platforms. There's also a lot going on right now. I understand a lot of people may not have time to necessarily watch sports the same way that they used to. And that's what Stephen A. Smith said on ESPN, that sure, the protests may be having a role in the initial ratings being down in the NFL, but it's worth keeping in mind that there's a lot going on for families right now. So do you think that there are multiple facets to why ratings were initially down?
Yeah, I think he's right on that. First of all, too, because people are inside so much and it's back to school. So are kids in school? Are they doing a hybrid thing? And think about this. It was a family deal. So you would take your family to the ball game. You would take them to an NFL game. You would take them to any of the sports that I can possibly think of off the top of my head. Half the time when I would look around, you'd see fathers with their children and mothers as well. So now that's not there. So that's ended the let's go out to the stadium factor in sports that's so big, and that's cost economics. That's the economics of it. It's cost a lot of money, obviously, for a lot of people. And also, I think it's cost viewers because you're not out there thriving, being a face painter, wearing your Cubs stuff on your face out there like you would be, right, at Wrigley. And so you're not doing that.
I was about to say, who showed you those pictures of me with Cubs face paint? But you do bring up an interesting point, and it's the idea that the whole reason you and I are having this conversation is because we are overlapping with a global pandemic. I mean, the football is actually, I think, the first total return to sports for the most part. I mean, it hasn't been delayed. I mean, there aren't people in the audiences or anything like that sort, but of course the NBA was delayed, the MLB was delayed, the Olympics were delayed. This is the first real test run, and I think the last I saw, as of last night, is that every single player, coach, and staffing member were clear from coronavirus. They didn't have, none of them tested positive going into Sunday, which is very good news from a transmission standpoint, but also for the return of sports as well, that I know a lot of people care about. Was this a good test run for the return of the NFL?
I think it's a great test run. And here's a piece of breaking news, if you will. I got this from the NFL that Sean McVay and some of the other coaches weren't wearing their masks the whole time. And so that had a lot of people on edge that, hey, we followed these protocols. We have no positive tests. Keep your mask up. And of course, Sean McVay is the coach of the Rams, and they played on Sunday Night Football against the Cowboys. So they won, but he was shown many times without his mask on. And I think they're going to really come down hard on any of the coaches, assistants, et cetera, that don't do that because they want to keep it clear. So it was a good test run.
Yeah, and of course, it's worth realizing, too, that if a game were to be canceled, by the way, if someone were to get coronavirus or something like that, that's millions of dollars for advertisers, the owners, the fans watching. All those things come together. So that's a lot of responsibility for one person not to take the precautions seriously. And I actually saw some pretty funny memes about it as well this morning, him trying to cover his face while giving play calls with a card. And people were like, I think I know another way to cover your mouth if you want to, at the same time, be healthy and secure, while at the same time making sure that other people aren't reading your lips for the play calls. So I thought that was kind of funny coming out of it, too. I'm glad to see that people are getting their sense of humor back, being able to at least escape from the news cycle a little bit with the return of sports. But Kate Delaney, it's always a pleasure talking to you, especially now that we can watch some football and some sports as well. Thanks for coming on the show today.
Anytime, my friend.